This will be our first episode, and for this first episode, we're gonna do it in English because today we have Johann. Hi Johann, how you doing?
Pretty good, Tavo. Thanks for having me.
Okay, let me tell you a little bit more about Johann. Johann and we met a while ago working for Land Life Company. So he is someone that really likes trees and plants, and he's been doing planting for a long, long time. So today, he's working, I think, could you tell us for who you're working right now and what are you doing right now?
Yeah, I'm the executive director of the International Conservation Foundation, and we're helping folks scale and do projects that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do, like the United States Forest Service, for example.
Okay, perfect. You know, what is the challenge? Why people are not doing these right plantings? Because you see that people want to do the restoration, but it doesn't happen. So what do you think is missing? Why we don't have this restoration that everybody wants?
Yeah, there seems to be all the pieces there. It's really the connection that's missing. So when we look at our partnership with the United States Forest Service, they're filled with brilliant individuals that are doing really amazing work, but there's not enough people to do the amount of work that's needed to do. U.S. Forest Service, for example, has had a 25% drop, I think, since like the 1980s in personnel. And then, we see wildfires and just forest activities needing to ramp up at a time when it's harder and harder to get people. Another thing is access to labor, equipment. It's all kind of going away. The generations that came up with all of that knowledge have sort of retired out, and there hasn't really been an effort to keep that knowledge and experience going. And so filling those gaps is what we need to do.
What a weird disconnection, because these new generations, they are into the environment, but you don't see them working then on these fields. So there's a gap. I was really struck by what you told me the other day about this planting that you did. That was something that hadn't, for 20 years hadn't happened. This, you call it like a fall planting. Could you explain me a little bit about what you were doing and what's the type of planting that you were doing, or what is that?
Yeah, so the planting that we did a fall planting in Southern Oregon, and it's very difficult for the government to do a fall planting. So if you were a large private forest landowner, you can look out, you can see what the weather is, and kind of pick the best time to plant your trees. Mm-hmm. And a fall planting is preferable for a number of reasons, or it's certainly something that should be worth exploring. But it's so hard for the government to issue a contract to reserve people for a specific period of time. So they would issue a contract, but if you reserve the people and it's very hot, or you haven't gotten any precipitation, or winter came early and you got snowed in, then you're basically paying for people to just stand there and not plant. So you need that flexibility. And what we've been able to do is we've been able to combine the expertise and hard work of the United States Forest Service with our flexibility to put crews on the ground, so we can respond very quickly to opportunities presented in the weather.
One question, today you're visiting us in our offices here in Mexico. Out of the forests that you're planting with, how many of those are born in the U.S.? The planters, the actual planters?
None. I would say the majority of our planting crews that we're very blessed to have are from Guatemala and Mexico. H-2B visa holders are critical to all reforestation efforts in the United States. It really doesn't matter where you are in the United States, if it's the U.S. Southeast, if it's the Pacific Northwest or California. If you don't have workers from Latin America, you're not going to get your job done.
You see, that's one of the things that you can see, that environment, it's a global thing, at least a hemispheric thing. North America has supply, on the practice right now, we're seeing that a lot of migrant workers go work and then come back as the monarch butterflies or so many species, like this is something that is happening for a while. What do you see as far as the restoration different that a commercial planting will do from a reforestation effort for conservation? What do you think is the focus, or what's the difference between one vision and the other vision?
You know, we tend to break things down. Really, the difference between any of these things is how something's funded. And when you look at a commercial operation, right, it's a commercial operation, so they know, they have it very fine-tuned where they're going to get their money from for reforestation, why they're reforesting, how they're going to maintain their forest. They're very focused on that. Restoration is having a hard time commoditizing and generating revenue. So they're reliant on grants. Grants are feast and famine, they come and go. That inconsistency makes it very difficult to plan multiple seasons. So if you go to a large timber operator with, 1,000 hectares, and they know exactly how many trees they're planting, how many trees they're harvesting, their sales prices, they can set their watch to how many people they need. So they have a system in place. Restoration is too inconsistent. There are times where there's too much funding. And it chokes up the system, prices get to shoot up with competition, and then all of that goes away, and then suddenly you have a glut for years where you're not getting the right people. So the big difference and the big obstacle is, what are you paying for? And that's what carbon offsets are trying to do and some other things.
See, that's very interesting what you're saying. Like a business-driven commercial enterprise, like planting trees as a commercial enterprise, is very well defined. It's done and it works well. And it has everything producing the trees. There's some huge nurseries. There's some people that plant 1,000 trees per day per person. They have the plots very well defined. And on the conservation arena, it's kind of spotty. Like sometimes this is missing, or the continuity. So I've been thinking that money is one of the main things, the value. I say value of the conservation itself. Because because why the forest exists for these forest companies? Because it brings money to them. It's not because they want the conservation, they want the money. So when you monetize the forest, but not as a forest that will yield wood, that it will be ecosystemic benefits, that's what I'm thinking that is the sweet spot. And also the connection, because you see these banks trying to make money, and you see these companies trying to make money too, or compensate or mitigate whatever is obligated to them. How do you think that professionalism can come into these conservation efforts that mainly are done by NGOs, because there's not too many companies out there that are trying to do this as a business. So this falls within the NGOs, which they cannot make money, or they cannot grow too much, or they cannot invest. So what do you think is needed there? Oh, but before, let me give you one of the hats. Verde hat. So you
I don't have a Nation Verde hats.
So now you have.
In restoration and forestry, hats are like currency. So you have a hat, you're saying a lot. I'm going to wear this at the Biochar conference.
I want to hold you for that. I'm expecting some photographs.
Oh, no, you'll get some.
Okay.
It's actually, what's really fascinating about it is, first of all, NGOs are doing it because they're trying to fill these gaps. So, we're a 501, we're a nonprofit in the state of California, but we're trying to fill a gap that the commercial area is not filling. And whenever you see a nonprofit dominant in an area that has so much need, there is a potential market there. But all restoration efforts, all reforestation efforts, that's really piggybacking off of those commercial projects, right? Those visa workers that we get to do our restoration and our projects, we don't have enough work for them to do just restoration. So we're really kind of at the will and timetable of even the commercial industry when it comes to our bandwidth and infrastructure. In terms of generating that professionalism in there, we just need to really demonstrate a true value associated with this. When it comes to timber or any other commodity, you have a commodity price, but restoration is insanely valuable. If we had proper forest management, we would reduce wildfires, we could address a lot of climate change. And it's very hard to quantify these things because they're not things we use in our daily life. They're not an active thing. But this activity does have a significant financial impact. It's just, how do we say that message? And how do we develop a commercial system to do it, as opposed to nonprofits kind of struggling to fill in those gaps?
And there's some ethereal things that we see it as ethereal, like it's out there nowhere, but water. Water, we use it every day. And water is created, the cycle comes with the forest, with the trees, with the replenishment. So people have this disconnection. They think water comes out of the tap. Mm-hmm. It's like my kid, he thinks money comes out of the automatic teller machine because he sees that comes out of the wall. So there's this disconnection. Also, everybody wants biodiversity. You know, the bald eagle or the different species that we see all over the world, and we want them to exist, but we don't give money for them to exist. And that gap has to disappear, because what I like about this, no matter with whom you speak all over the spectrum, no matter what background, ethnic, whatever, it's hard to say to someone to say, you know, we want to protect our forests, our lands, and protect. I say, okay, if it's destroyed, they want to restore it, you know. So I think there's this disconnection, and we need to work on that disconnection. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that we've geared everything towards a response and very little to being proactive. And even when things are well-intentioned, they're not scientifically based. So, you know, when you talk about protecting bald eagles or protecting spotted owls, well, what happens is people's idea of protection is preservation, not conservation. And it ignores the natural cycles of the environment. And so I just visited a fire that burned in 2015, and more than a dozen spotted owl nests were burned up. Why? Because the area was protected for spotted owl, and we couldn't manage that forest in such a way that to mitigate fire, because we were so heavily restricted. And so a lot of people are doing stuff that feels good or sounds good, but isn't scientifically based. At the end of the day, planting a tree is just one step. It's like you showed up to the birth and you want to take credit for that person's entire life. We have to think of the forest as more than just the event of planting the tree. We have to think of it as everything from preparing the site to what is the life cycle of that tree and forest, and how do people benefit. Biggest problem by far, and the reason that climate change is always a contentious issue, is climate change is typically one group of people asking the people who live near and depend on the forest to sacrifice everything.
Exactly.
You will not solve climate change unless you improve the quality of life for the people there, and they develop an economic dependency on the forest.
I think you nailed it right there. I seen same thing happen in Mexico. Like there's this conservation effort, and then you have this national park system, but it's so stringent that you can't even go and heal the forest because they won't allow you. So then fuel accumulates, and then you have big fires, or then you have all these diseases spreading, and it's counterintuitive that some people say, no, that's the natural occurring things, but it's not like that. At the rate that climate change is hitting, ecosystems are not able to adapt. So that's one of the things that I'm looking, that sometimes we're part of that. And it's hard because it's being developed as it goes. So most of the times, the people that actually has experience on is doing it, they're not running the things. Sometimes it's a politician, or sometimes it will be a business, and then they will have different intentions. So that's another hard part. What I wanted to do with this is to bring more depth into the conservation talk. Only have the 15 seconds of a reel or 30 seconds or something like that, and sometimes you need more in-depth content. So that's the reason that we're trying to do this podcast. So that way we can have more in-depth conversations on subjects that really matters to me and to people that like to conserve ecosystems. So what do you think about spaces like this, Johann?
No, I think it's very important. You know, the first step in everything is education, and just to convey to people that it's so important to understand everyone involved in the life cycle, everyone dependent on these things. I think this podcast is phenomenal. I think opportunities like this to speak to folks and to demonstrate work that's being done and needs and things that need to be met. No, I'm really glad you're doing this. I think this is a great step in the right direction.
Okay, and just there's a couple questions. How many trees have you planted in your life, directed, involved, or been there?
Yeah, I'm mostly a nursery man, so probably planting in the ground, too few, I'd be embarrassed. But grown in the nursery, over 1 million in my career, overseen being planted. My kids always like to correct me, and they say, how many trees did you plant? And I'll tell them, and they go, you didn't plant those. Your workers planted those. And I'm like, okay. But no, probably over the course of my career, more than 10 million trees been planted. But that's a small drop to what's actually planted and grown just every year in the United States. So there's a lot of need for real good people to join the industry.
Johann, could you tell us a little bit about that nursery that you have pretty much a family-run operation there, and you have really cheap labor there?
Yeah, it was actually really crazy. We ran, my wife, who's one of the most brilliant propagation specialists for native vegetation, California-based native vegetation. Me and her and 3 of our boys, we ran a nursery in the Mojave Desert. And the temperature would get as low as below 10 degrees and get over 110 degrees in a single year. And no, we grew hundreds of thousands of California native plants, conifers, and yeah, we lived on that nursery. It was some of the best years of our life, but that was like 2012 to 2016.
How many people work on that nursery?
To grow about 1 million trees was me, my wife. We had someone who ran the nursery, probably 6 people tops, maybe 5.
Amazing. And could you tell us a story, maybe a story when you did some monitoring or some planting that really something that struck you, that maybe a pest or something that you have to overcome, or a challenge that you realize, oh my God, and then you overcome that? Could you tell us something about that?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is I was doing gold spotted oak borer management when I was in the fire department. It was an intense project. I ran that for about 18 months, or I was a key member of the team for 18 months. And we would monitor the trees and have to count these holes. But what really is really crazy is after doing it for 5, 6, 7, 8 months, you could actually look at a tree and you could read, and you'd be like, that one has a pest. And there was one time we went through this forest and we're like, we know this forest has pests, we can't find them. And it was raining and it was hard, and I turned around and I said, that tree has pests. And the 2 guys next to me said they weren't. I bet them $100. They never paid. And I'm like, go check that tree. And that tree was, and so we were able to identify that tree and quarantine that tree, and basically we had to remove it to prevent spread. But it's really interesting that the more you get in touch with nature, you know, kind of the science bleeds into the language, and you start speaking to the forest. I always hate talking like that. But I really love the fact that after seeing hundreds and hundreds of trees, I could just look at a tree and go, even though you couldn't tell, that tree has the pest.
You think, I want to close with, trees are connected. Forest is an entity. They're connected by mycorrhiza. So, you know, there's this force that unites us. So I think maybe you feel that force in the forest. So congratulations, you're a Nativo Verde, and you're part of this Green Nation. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Tavo.
Thanks.